The Genesis simulation stands at an interesting point in the ARK franchise, because it expands upon its typical survival roots and opens up the game to new, unexplored territories for its already established game design. Whether through its missions or its new types of explorer notes, emphasis on unexplored and underutilized biomes like the oceanic, volcanic, lunar, or bog-type biomes, Genesis tries lots of new things and has had lots of feedback. Acting as the first part of the overall Genesis expansion, Gen 1 has served as good testing grounds for the finale, and will have impacted it in more than a few ways. Regardless, Gen 1 is a breathtaking new map to explore that offers fantastic new mission-based challenges, a familiar robotic companion, interesting new early and late-game items, and unique areas to explore that have never been officially used to the same extent within ARK ever before. So, with that being said, my name is Ned, and let's explore these rich new simulated environments, all separated inside the Genesis simulation. Starting with biomes, Genesis has a solid 5. These include the bog, Arctic, ocean, volcanic, and lunar. Each one is incredibly distinct compared to other maps, and this is made more obvious through the fact that you have to teleport between them using your robot companion, HLN-A. Let's start with the bog biome. Genesis says that this is apparently an easy zone, but I would argue it is far from it. While none of the biomes in Genesis are actually easy when compared to other maps, the bog is especially difficult because of its creatures. If you've ever been to a swamp in ARK, that's basically what the bog is, with the same kinds of evil creatures roaming around. Visibility is lowered since the whole biome is shrouded in fog, making it hard to see distant enemies, and even harder to deal with them when they're bombarding you. On top of that, their difficulty is increased further because many of them are of the X variant, which is a common theme within all of the biomes. The bog is a very difficult biome to live in, though it's not the most dangerous on the map by comparison. Much like the island's snowy tundra, the Arctic is very cold and has many of the same kinds of creatures you'll come to expect within the snow. The main spawn zones are on the left side of the biome, while nearly the entire right side is encased in a constant, never-ending blizzard. At the center of the biome, you'll find a towering mountain that serves as a great point of reference and a really fun thing to swing off of with a Bloodstalker. Aside from the animals and the cold, the Arctic biome is probably the most familiar, and thus I would rank its difficulty as being lower than the bog biome, despite how easy it is to freeze to death. To escape the constant swarms of death from the bog or the freezing temperatures of the Arctic, the ocean biome is a great place to just vibe. It has only a few land masses scattered around that are more or less just very tall islands, mostly inaccessible without certain creatures or some kind of equipment to aid with climbing. The ocean itself, however, is a deep and rich area with tons of creatures scattered around, whether your PC or bandwidth can handle it or not. It also stands as the only biome that still has a master AI, otherwise known as Mutter. Typically, in any bodies of water across every other map, players will consistently need scuba or other kinds of equipment or consumables in order to survive in the water for long periods of time. In the Genesis ocean biome, the water actually allows players to swim much faster and breathe for longer periods of time, allowing for easier traversal overall. While I wouldn't necessarily call it a weather event, the ocean does feature some pretty insane underwater vortex type things which can be pretty frustrating to deal with as they swirl you in and then fling you off in a random direction. That being said, the ocean biome is probably the most calm, at least when survivors are just hanging out on the islands. At the near polar opposite in regards to humidity, the volcanic biome is a hot, rough, and inhospitable place, though it has one very important resource hidden within it, in addition to a new type of weather event. The volcanic has similar types of creatures that you would normally find on mountains and other dangerous areas of most maps. It's very hot at all times, and the volcano itself is capable of erupting sporadically, which fries anything that's inside of it, including teams and players. This also causes volcanic rocks to fly up and out of the volcano, which can kill any creatures or players they touch. Overall, the volcanic is a very dangerous biome when considering how many aggressive creatures exist within it, but some may argue it's worth the risk because of the quantity of element found inside. Similar to the volcanic, the lunar also has a weather event which is known as the meteor shower. It acts similar to how the meteors work on extinction, though the lunar biome type is much more severe and deadly, with higher overall frequency of the rocks themselves. Aside from the fact that nearly all creatures in the lunar biome are the TEK variants, the biome has an incredibly unique dynamic of shade, where survivors have to be within the shade in order to not be affected by radiation from the glaring sun. This radiation can be lessened by using hazard suit, but as a side effect of that, survivors will also be cold, meaning there's sort of a trade-off of using hazard versus fur armor at any given time depending on whether the survivor is within shade. Interestingly, the biome does not require any special equipment to breathe, since the Genesis simulation is merely that, a simulation. The lunar biome allows for some equal times fun and frustrating gravity mechanics, which make it possible to leap great distances and fall slowly with the low gravity, setting it apart from any biome that has ever been added to the game thus far. When it comes to resources, Genesis is quite fragmented, and that isn't just because the biomes are separated with indestructible barriers, but also because you can directly buy resources from an in-game shop. Given the sheer number of resource nodes within all maps, I'll instead be covering only the new ones that Genesis adds. If you're looking for a cohesive guide on the standard base game or legacy DLC resource locations, I will have a resource map for Genesis 1 linked in the description below. Generally, the only new resources that Gen 1 adds are the ambergris and shell fragments, though there are other resources like trophies involved with missions such as the golden nugget, high-quality pollen, and the golden striped megalodon tooth. When it comes to ambergris, this is a lunar-specific resource which is really only used for astrocetus purposes and feeding baby magmasaurs, and it can be mined from these types of rocks in the lunar biome. Shell fragments, on the other hand, are collected in the ocean biome by chopping up megachelon, and can be broken down into chitin, used to create megachelon platform saddles, and lastly to create the wood ocean platform. Like I said, for a better understanding of the resources across the map, I will have the resource map as well as the Genesis Part 1 wiki linked below. Now, for me, the most anticipated aspect of Genesis Part 1 leading up to its release was the new creatures. These are fantastic and have great uses, assuming we pretend the giant turtle doesn't exist. The basic idea with the new creatures is that each biome features at least one. Before getting into the completely new creatures, it is important to acknowledge Gen 1's variant creatures as well as the brutes. As you may recall, Aberration had the aberrant creatures, Extinction had the corrupted, and thus Genesis has the X variants. The basic gist of the X creatures is that they have a massive 250% damage increase, as well as a 60% damage resistance in the wild, making them far more dangerous than normal wild creatures. When tamed, they lose this crazy buff, but have the bonus of having their max level be 88 levels after hatch or tame instead of 73. They also have a 5% damage increase and 3% less health when tamed, according to the wiki. Now, on top of the X variants, Gen 1 also adds other types of variants known as the brutes. Given that there are almost no alpha creatures, brutes stand in for that, and are really only found while doing missions as opposed to being in the open world. That being said, I would now like to cover the completely new creatures featured within Genesis 1. Starting with the bog biome, it adds two new creatures, those being the Bloodstalker and the insect swarms. Bloodstalkers hang from the trees in the central area of the map and are really creepy. What they usually do in the wild is they grab their prey with webs, pull them in, and slowly devour them in the most brutal way possible. To tame Bloodstalkers, survivors must allow themselves to be grabbed and then brought up as they feed the Bloodstalker with blood bags. Bloodstalkers are amazing at moving around the map and do especially well in maps with lots of vertical objects to tether onto, as they can grapple onto multiple points at a time, swinging around and propelling themselves through the air. Bog spiders aside, the insect swarms are untamable and act as perhaps the most frustrating feature within the bog. Yes, even more than capros. Insect swarms will bother survivors almost indefinitely by spawning near them at basically all times. They seek to damage and kill any survivors or tames they can, and they can usually be dealt with by using torches or high damage tames. While the bog is intense with the constant fear of bloodstalkers and the annoyance of insect swarms, the Arctic biome is usually a lot more chill and only features one new creature, which is known as the ferox. These little things might look cute at first, but after having an encounter with them once, I now run every time I see one. They are terrifying. They'll walk up to you, all cute, about the size of a jerboa, a typical shoulder pet, and then if they feel like it, they'll begin morphing into a giant, ripped bunny that will tear you to pieces. This is their main niche, being able to transform from a small shoulder pet into a large and dangerous beast. The way survivors have to tame them, and the way that they're even able to do this at all, is through the allure of element. To tame ferox, survivors have to feed them element, which turns them into the large variant, and then you have to sort of wait for them to tire out and repeat it until they're tamed. As mounts, ferox can be fed element to increase their addiction, with the knockoff effect of increasing their damage, resistance, and speed, and are quite useful for defending an area doing decent damage and knockback, especially if they're juiced up on element. Moving to a warmer climate, the ocean biome features two new creatures, those being the megachelon and the parakeet fish school. Like I briefly mentioned earlier, the megachelon, or giant turtle, is not the most useful creature, and I think it was maybe a little overhyped leading up to the release of Gen 1. While it has a natural platform saddle on its back, megachelon are notoriously slow and have very little climbing ability, making them a tedious mount to use, though they have potential for fun little rides with friends and can give oxygen to those nearby or on top of them. Their taming method plays right into the other unique creature the ocean adds, being the parakeet fish school. Much like the insect swarms, the fish schools are quite dangerous, though their main mechanic in the ocean biome involves being defended from waves of coelacanth and saber-toothed salmon as the megachelon sort of feeds off the school, thus increasing its taming bar. This is a difficult minigame oftentimes, and my experience has been a little bit glitchy, though it's not impossible to do. You definitely do want to be careful around the parakeet fish school because it can actually damage off the mount, so be really careful around them since they can kill you very quickly even if you're on like a Mosa or a Tuso. Nearing the end of our list, the volcanic biome adds one new creature, which is known as the magmasaur. These things more or less rule the inside of the volcano, since that's where most of them spawn and lay their eggs. Magmasaurs are highly aggressive and territorial in the wild, and are known for sniping things with their dead-on lava rock projectiles. For survivors to use them, they have to steal a magmasaur egg and raise the baby by feeding it the lunar resource ambergris. After they're fully raised, they can even be used to smelt things like ingots and meat, and actually have a weight reduction on metal. Their projectiles, speed, weight capacity, rage effect, and the lava swimming capabilities make them quite useful across the board and are great for farming and destroying metal structures, among other things. As for the last main creature added to Genesis, it can be found within the silent yet chaotic lunar biome in the form of a ginormous glowing space whale. This titan of a beast, also known as the Astrocetus, is a slow but fairly deadly creature that roams around and mostly just vibes. Much like the Titanosaur, they have to be knocked out with blunt force from things like cannon shells or cannonballs. Once tamed and saddled up, Astrocetus can use ambergris to carpet bomb anything beneath them and even have multiple passenger seats which trimates can mount to shoot from. I myself found the Astrocetus to be pretty slow, and since I'm not a PvP player, I never really used it much, but I can imagine that it could have its uses in PvP. While the conventional uses for the creatures in Genesis still apply, the main new way that you will likely end up using them is through the completion of missions. Unlike any other map before it, Genesis 1 adds in an entirely new mission-based gameplay loop, which actually works pretty well. The basic idea of missions is that there are 8 types, and all the biomes generally feature at least one of each of these 8 types, save for a couple exceptions. These exceptions would include the ocean biome not having a gauntlet mission, or only the bog and lunar biomes having the basketball missions. The types of missions that you'll encounter across the map include the point collection, brute searches, races, item collections, fishing mini-games, escort missions, basketball, wave-based gauntlets, and lastly the glitches, though they don't technically count as standard missions. The point collection missions involve having to find little objective markers in an area of the biome within a certain amount of time. The brute searches are insanely tough hunts that require tracking down the brute-type creatures via their tracks and gradually damaging them over time until they're defeated. The races are, well, races with various types of creatures across the various biomes. The item collection missions feature sort of going down a set path to find an area which houses the resource-like items that have to be collected shortly before a dangerous and rushed escape to the finish line. The fishing missions are sometimes fun, other times tedious little mini-games where survivors have to collect a certain amount of fish within a given amount of time. The escort missions require protecting a certain creature, usually a baby, and making sure that it reaches its destination without being devoured by the waves of creatures which will swarm it. The basketball missions are tons of fun and involve throwing dodos or bulb dogs through hoops in the bog or lunar biomes respectively, though half of them require at least having one other player. And lastly, the wave-based gauntlet missions are incredibly fun and difficult on-foot battles where the simulation sends waves of tough creatures that have to be killed with a variety of on-demand weapons that you sort of just pick up. When it comes to glitches, Genesis grants survivors a full mission complete point if they manage to collect all of the glitches in one biome, allowing for an extra 5 mission complete points if all glitches are collected. Thus, I am including them on this list for that reason. For all of the actual missions, they can be completed in 3 different difficulties, and each difficulty counts for 1 mission complete point. Interestingly, the bosses are also done through the sort of mission mechanics in HLN-A, though this will be explained near the end. Speaking of HLN-A, I'd like to briefly cover the shop system within Genesis. It may seem a little alien to some, especially in a survival game, but I think it generally works pretty well. Over time, survivors will earn points known as hexagons. These hexagons can be earned through completing missions, collecting glitches, and occasionally just interacting with HLN-A. The hexagons can be exchanged within HLN-A's shop for actual items. For the most part, these include most resources or like raw foods like berries and meat, but they also allow for emotes to be purchased, as well as cryopods, plant X, Y, and Z seeds, element, and new items called loot crates. As per the usual section of these guides, I'd like to go over the new gear and structures that Genesis adds to the game, and first and foremost, I gotta say they did a lot better with this map than Extinction, at least in that regard. Genesis adds a few new weapons, tools, and structures, of course, in addition to the various saddles. When it comes to weapons, Gen 1 adds the cruise missile, TEK grenade launcher, TEK shoulder cannon, which is more like an armor module than anything, and the TEK claws, which act as a cool new TEK-based melee weapon, which chains attacks and sort of gradually increases speed as you click. For tools, you'll be able to use the new mining drill, fishing net, and electronic binoculars, though they only tell distance and aren't really all that useful. What I find most exciting about the new equipment are the structures. Wood and metal ocean platforms allow survivors to build bases wherever they want on the water. The TEK jump pad allows for awesome new base traversal with strings of jumping trajectories being set up, in addition to the pressure plate and TEK sensors, which allow for new ways of detecting and activating various structures. Lastly, Genesis adds an actual official vehicle to the game, which thus far has been completely unprecedented within ARK. The TEK Hoverskiff is the fastest thing in the game, can pick up the most amount of creatures, and can even be built on, though it is quite costly to run. Hoverskiffs make farming a breeze and have drastically changed the meta of the game for both PvP and PvE players. Overall, the new tools, weapons, and structures that Gen 1 adds are amazing, and I cannot describe how glad I was to see their addition to the game. While the new gear and equipment that Genesis adds are fantastic, the Explorer notes, while not bad, are certainly different from every other map. Explorer notes here are seen exclusively from one character, being none other than HLN-A. They're collected in the form of the glitches themselves, with each glitch being associated with a different note. Each note is voice acted by HLN-A, and so they're a little easier to digest as a result. Some of these glitches give information about the background lore within Genesis and the ARK story, but for the most part they offer silly little stories that HLN-A sort of just tells about how the past survivors broke the simulation in a variety of ways and caused bugs or glitches that had to be fixed. Pretty meta for ARK, I think, but it works. The most interesting thing I found that HLN-A talks about is the concept of each master AI. The master AIs were supposed to watch over each biome and control them much like overseers, but something caused them to go haywire and either get destroyed, disabled, or outright deleted from the simulation. That is all of them except for one, that being the master AI of the ocean biome, otherwise known as Moeder. This creature stands as the first of the two bosses in the map. Moeder is a giant fish eel thing which can be fought by activating the mission at any time for either the gamma, beta, or alpha difficulty within the depths of the ocean. Moeder is a really dangerous boss and has a couple unique mechanics beyond being the first ever underwater boss added to the game. It has its own eel minions, which are sort of in the form of smaller versions of it that will scale with the difficulty of Moeder itself and are very dangerous. Do keep in mind that the minions are able to do tons of damage to survivors even while they're mounted, so med brews are more or less a necessity for this fight. Moeder itself will be in a hidey hole as the minions are alive, but once they're all killed, Moeder will slowly come out of the hole and begin attacking. This is the part where survivors have to deal as much damage as possible before it shrinks back into its hole again. This usually happens about a minute after coming out, and then the minions will sort of respawn and it just repeats. To make it worse, the arena flings vortexes at the survivor and it can be very disorienting and just really tough. I found it really tough when I've done it in the past, but it's possible that there's just a better strategy that I was never aware of. Now, as for the final boss of Genesis 1, the Corrupted Master Controller, it is directly linked to mission count. Rather than having to collect artifacts or tributes like the prior maps, Gen 1 involves completing a certain number of missions in order to unlock each difficulty of the final boss. This doesn't mean that every survivor has to have that amount completed, only just the person that's opening the portal. Speaking of which, the portal itself can actually be opened pretty much anywhere, meaning you can open it right from your base if you want to. For the Gamma difficulty, it requires 58 missions to be completed. For Beta, it requires 116. And for the Alpha difficulty, it requires 168. When it comes to the fight itself, the Corrupted Master Controller is what I would deem as the most difficult boss fight in the entire game, at least before Gen 2 since it hasn't come out yet as of this video. I haven't found many people who actually disagree with me on this sentiment because it is overwhelming to say the least. The boss fight involves fending off hordes of corrupted creatures, but also corrupted human enemies which are intelligent enough to even use ranged weapons like bows and grenades. Worse still, these enemies don't even have a cap on how many can be in the arena at a time, making it very easy to quickly become overwhelmed. In order to progress through the fight, survivors have to kill the corrupted avatars and dinotars and collect keys from them, which they in turn have to deposit into a small terminal called the Codebreaker. Once enough keys have been deposited, the Codebreaker will activate and send the survivor and their team to the next arena. There are a total of 4 arena areas, with 3 of them surrounding the central one. Each one around the center has to be destroyed or completed before survivors actually teleport to the center and can even damage the Master Controller at all. This serves to make it a very lengthy battle and one that you and your creatures have to have very high endurance for. Once survivors make it to the final platform, they have to repeat the same Codebreaker loop by fending off more waves of corrupted, as the Master Controller itself will finally begin to fight the survivor, mostly with really annoying stun mechanics. If the Master Controller is about to do its laser eye thing, make sure you go under the various overhead bridges to prevent getting shocked by it. After depositing enough keys into whichever Codebreaker is activated, the Master Controller will be disabled for a short time and then it can be damaged. This more or less has to be repeated 4 times since, as the wiki explains it, there's a damage threshold that only allows for about a quarter of its health to be depleted until it goes back into shield mode. By the end, this fight becomes truly insane with the sheer number of enemies, and the only strategy I ever used involved 20 Tech Rexes with really decent stats and saddles, though I never played on official settings, so I can almost guarantee that you will need even further preparation if you're playing on official servers. As always, however it's done, after defeating the Master Controller, he'll end up making one last promise to the survivor, which is that he will see them in the world beyond. For those of you who have yet to figure it out, the Ascension cutscene will make it blatantly obvious who the Master Controller was. After escaping the simulation, survivors will be greeted to HLN-A, welcoming them back to the real world. Shortly after being guided to a Terran Federation exosuit, the survivor is alerted to a dangerous sound as one of Rockwell's tentacles bursts into the chamber, grabbing the survivor and pulling them into the unknown. This is where Genesis 1 leaves off, and presumably where we will continue from in the finale, Genesis 2. So, with all of that being said, I do hope you enjoyed this video, and more importantly, I hope you learned something from it. If you did like the video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more guides and cinematic ARK videos. I need to seriously thank my volunteer team for helping to create this video by body acting. Having real on-screen people doing stuff is always awesome, and I just want to thank you guys for helping out with this video. Given that this has been the final story map Evo guide until Genesis 2, I may end up doing the non-story maps leading up to the finale, so stay tuned for that. In any case, thank you everyone again for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye everyone.